Hey, welcome back. Time for some Type 40, extra Type 40 here, exclusively on the Type 40 channel. With me, Dan Hadley, Birmingham's king of the geeks. Welcome back to Type 40 Extra, before show, after show, and in between show, to the podcasts and the live streams and everything else that we put out under the Type 40 banner. Type 40 Extra is whatever we need it to be. So sometimes they're conversations that can go on for a couple of hours about really contentious subjects. Other times it's 10 or 15 minutes of a rant or a rave about something or another, or an unboxing, whatever takes my fancy, really, or whatever one of the others wants to come and talk about. Other times we get guests on, people that we like, people we have running conversations with, or who just want to come on and chew the fat. And I think this was an ideal opportunity to catch up with this guy. Yeah. Who's calling? Well, this time it's Will Hadcroft back on the show.
Hey.
Hello, Will.
I thought you had Peter Capaldi on then. I thought, blimey.
One day. He'll answer my call one day. He will. So yeah, it's been a few weeks since we last talked. When we got together, didn't we? And had a casual conversation about your life and Doctor Who, the universe, and everything, didn't we?
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. Yeah, and we had some good feedback, haven't we, from one or two folks?
Well, I was going to ask you, we had some great comments, but I wondered if anybody had reached out to you about it, because it was a pretty personal conversation that we had, wasn't it? About your own life and challenges that you'd faced in life. So did people reach out to you?
Yeah, I think what we touched on a few nerves there. I think what I was explaining as, things that happened in my life, I think they're really common amongst Doctor Who fans, particularly Doctor Who fans of our generation, growing up with the old series, and in a time when it wasn't that highly respected amongst the general public. So you talk about yourself being king of the geeks, I think a lot of us feel that we very much are in that bracket, or we were when we were growing up, and Doctor Who was our special thing. And even amongst other science fiction followings, it wasn't highly regarded. It wasn't seen the way Star Wars is seen, for example, and even Star Trek. It didn't have the same kind of respect. So you knew you were following something that was very niche, and few people seemed to like it. And me and you discussing this and growing up through the 1970s and 80s, and Doctor Who following us through our lives and our experiences, it just seemed to have touched a few people. And I have had one or two folk come forward and say that the way we were discussing our experiences was very much mirroring their own experiences. So I'm glad that viewers have got something out of it, really. So it's not just me talking about myself. It's resonating. And also a couple of people said, hope you and Dan continue this and go into the wilderness years and what that was like. So people are following the theme of it, if you like, the story of it, from the Tom Baker era up to the cancellation and then beyond.
Yeah, because there's a lot of us out there that do have small-ish obsession with Doctor Who. I think this strikes a chord with a lot of people out there. And the things that we talked about, Will, there were things, obviously, as you were telling me about your life, that sparked off memories in me and made me look at myself too, because we all are on the spectrum somewhere, aren't we? That's pretty much an indisputable fact. I think it's certainly accepted by those who are practiced in such things, in statementing and things like that. It's accepted we're all on the spectrum, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, there are some people who believe that absolutely everybody is somewhere on the spectrum, and they're probably right. They probably are at the very thin end of the wedge. There probably are people we would consider regular folk who exhibit some of the traits, and then you move along the spectrum, and then there are people like you and I, who are what professionals would call high functioning autism. So we have the obsessive tendencies. We may struggle with social interaction in certain circumstances. We may even have problems with sensory overload, where we go in a place we can't cope with noises and lights and that sort of thing. I do have a bit of that.
My eldest son, who is Asperger's,
Yeah. So you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And then the further up the scale, the more intense it gets, until you get to what I would call classic autism, where it's people who are selectively mute, can't stand being touched, almost agoraphobic. The intense end of the spectrum is really bad, and because I've given talks. I gave a talk at a university. I had an autobiographical book out, and I was invited to give a talk at John Moores University in Liverpool. And it was authors who have the condition, and professional people were talking from their side of it. And one or two people who were there, I think they must have been students at the university who had the condition. And there was one gentleman who, because he had his social interaction problems and was obsessive, every time someone giving the talk made a statement he didn't agree with, he would, from the audience, talk over the top of them and correct them. So I was thinking, I'm not as far gone as this guy, because I would never be so impolite. But you could see he could not resist. He could not resist it. He had to correct her. And so someone was talking about something, and he brought up The Prisoner, the Patrick McGoohan series, and because they were talking about how obsessions can be helpful to a person on the spectrum. And he just interrupted her mid-speech. He said, "You might well say that, but I had a massive obsession with The Prisoner, and I can tell you it wasn't helpful at all." And I was thinking, yeah, I've got a big obsession with The Prisoner too, probably for all the same reasons, and I can see why it wouldn't be helpful if you were to obsess about it to the nth degree. Because if you're walking around thinking that you're a prisoner of the village, and everyone is regarding you as a number, and you don't fit, and they want certain things from you, and you're not willing to divulge them, that's not a happy life. Patrick McGoohan got away with it because of his attitude and the way he presented himself. Most of us, if we were stuck in a place like that, or if we feel we are stuck in a place like that, are not going to react the way he did and come off well. You know?
No one loses their S better than Patrick McGoohan in The Prisoner. But I was thinking about television, Will, because I do consider myself to be almost telly reared. My mother's generation, they used to talk about being granny reared, when a lot of people, after the war, where there was a lot of hardship and rationing and all that kind of thing, and both parents, I think for the first time, really properly went out to work for long working days. And so my mother was raised by her grandmother, and she was granny reared. I had a different upbringing. I was brought up in a one parent family. My father passed away when I was very, very young, and there was no other parent. There was no second parent. But I did have the telly. The telly was there. The telly was kind of a member of our family. It was noisier than the rest of us. It was always on. It always stayed in the one place. TVs didn't really move around so much, then you certainly couldn't carry them around. But it was like an extra family member in the 70s and the 80s. And I don't think that's particularly unusual. I think a lot of people felt like that, even if they're not able to, they've never felt the need or been in a situation where they've had to express it or reflect on it. But Will, what I was wondering is that with this accepted, I think that's probably an indisputable fact. There aren't countless books analysing, for example, The Generation Game, or Blankety Blank, or even other dramas, like All Creatures Great and Small, and other things that are popular. It's always the cult TV, isn't it? It's The Prisoner, it's The $6 Million Man, it's Knight Rider, it's Blake Seven. It's these culty, geeky shows that would have appealed to what our friend Stephen Noonan on Type 40 describes as the eccentric child, and we latch on hard in early life, and we don't let go, do we?
I think No, we don't, is the answer to your question. I think it's, the
They're great
eccentric
shows, don't get me
child.
wrong.
The eccentric child, yeah. But I think also children who feel, again, I'm talking from my own experience really, but I think it's true of many of us. We feel like outsiders. We're outsiders in our own society. We're outsiders at school. We don't fit. We don't belong. And I think we're drawn to these imaginative programs, partly for escapism. But in the case of Doctor Who and The Prisoner, it's a role model. It's someone who we feel is like ourselves. There are not many characters on television where we can think, he's like me. Whereas with the Doctor, we did see ourselves in that character, or we wished we were like him, you know? If we were very shy and bashful and suffered at the hands of bullies, as I did, you wished that you had the glib tongue of Tom Baker or the arrogance of Colin Baker to get out of various situations. Or you wished you were like Patrick McGowan, could just snap somebody down with a word. So it's a combination of the imagination, because a lot of us are, well, it's all of us really, highly imaginative people. We're thinkers. We dwell on things. We think deeply about things. And those are the programs that you talk about, like All Creatures Great and Small, as lovely as they are and as iconic as they are, wonderfully drawn characters and wonderfully produced programs. They don't speak to people like us in the same way, because there is nobody like us in them, and they don't touch on the subjects that we obsess over and ponder on. So I think that's why there are books being written about Doctor Who all the time, and Blake Seven, and even niche things like the tripods, things that even amongst sci-fi fans don't have a huge following, but the people who love the tripods really love it, And I know there is a book being written right now. There's a gentleman called Chris Jones in New Zealand who's working on a very detailed book about the making of the tripods.
Oh, fantastic.
Interviewing everybody. He's interviewed all the four main leads. He's interviewed the producer. He's had a chat with me because he knows I'm a super fan of the tripods, and quite a few other people. He's met the gang from Tripods Cast, if you know about that.
Yes.
Brilliant podcast about the series and the books. So you would think, well, why is he writing a book about the tripods when it's not as well loved as Blake Seven, for example? It's because there are enough of us out there, who love it to bits and will buy it. And of course, because he loves it as well, he wants to document it. No one's ever fully documented the series. So
yeah, there's a similar book coming out about Star Cops as well, and that's very much in the same kind of bracket, isn't it? We do live in a joyous time for geeks, where self-publishing at places like Lulu, it's sort of opened the floodgates really for things that a mainstream publisher couldn't afford to print. They'd probably never shift the numbers that they would need, would they? But obviously, Doctor Who titles is a different kettle of fish, but the more niche stuff.
Yeah, you can. A publisher is thinking in terms of sales, really, and if it's not going to reach a certain threshold, forget it. Whereas with print on demand, the technology that we have now in print on demand, if you get someone to edit your work, you hire someone to edit your writing, hire someone to design. A graphic designer who can do a really good design of the cover, an artist. You can hire some really high quality artists relatively cheaply, and the book cover can look stunning. If you get the right people involved, you can knock out some high quality stuff and sell only a few hundred copies to the people who really want it. Because
they really need that book. They've probably wanted a book like that for years and years and years and years. I often talk to people through making this show, the podcast and the live streams, who are a bit younger, and we talk about the years in which we grew up in the 70s and the 80s. I think it's hard for them. They can read about it all they want, with some great books out there that do capture that time period quite nicely. But to put it in context and look at at the broader TV landscape, I think is slightly harder. I mean, we can go back there in our minds, can't we? And we remember what it was like to sit in front of the television on a Saturday evening. We've made our choice, BBC One or ITV. We were there largely for the night, and that was that. But just in case you'd forgotten, or you out there, you don't know what we're talking about, here's a little video, a quick sample of what it was like on the average Saturday night in the mid-'80s with your hero, Doctor Who. Well, check it out.
Brilliant.
Saturday on BBC One. In a moment, Roland Rat the series continues from beneath King's Cross with the entire Rat Then at 5:45, Doctor Who could use a hand.
We've got to help him.
At 6:15, a new series of Bob's Full House.
You unborn babies.
I love that show, Will.
Yeah, very clever.
Yes, about getting out.
At 6:50, Heidi High.
Loved it. Yeah.
Yeah, one of my favourite sitcoms.
Come on in, to your bed, mate.
All these shows are like old friends, aren't they?
I'm laughing at the clip there. Paul Daniels, yeah.
At one time, he could have been the Doctor in 2004 if the tabloids have had their way. Casualty's still going now.
Yeah.
I don't know what this is.
The woman that my boyfriend is having an affair
Oh,
with.
Susan
They
Sarandon.
would always run a late night movie, wouldn't they? That's normally how it ended.
11:25,
Yeah.
The little girl who lives down the lane.
Trick or treat. What? Trick or treat.
And the scary one.
Saturday night on
Yeah.
BBC One.
But that's it. That's how they'd roll it out, wasn't it? Or in the
Yeah.
friendly BBC One globe in gold and blue. Ah, great days, Will. Great days.
Absolutely. And you look down that list. If they were to put that stuff on now, I'm not saying it would appeal to the audiences, younger audiences, but if they were to run that now on a Saturday night, I'd watch most of it. I think, even now.
A couple of those shows I do rewatch all the time, particularly Heidi High. It's one of my all-time favourite comedies. Wonderful, wonderful stuff. But that entire menu, I think, oh, I love that. I love that as well. You were there for the night, and the television was, it was an extra family member, but it was a window into this world that revolved around BBC Television Centre and Doctor Who, the Doctor, whoever was playing the character, certainly, I think up until your guy, up until Colin was doing it, was absolutely part of that, stitched in to that side of popular culture. The Doctor, up until the point where they lost faith in it, the Doctor was almost like a representative of the BBC. In fact, I think they may have brought in Roland Rat as an attempt to take his place, looking back, because the changeover sort of happened in '86. They brought him in, they snapped him away, didn't they? And Colin eventually got left out in the cold there.
Yeah. The 1985 hiatus, as we call it, really, really kicked the Doctor really hard, and after that, that's really the start of it being a kind of something that you would laugh at, isn't it? You know. From those who are not the hardcore fans, people used to laugh about the cheap effects all the time, but they loved it. They didn't love it from Trial of a Time Lord onwards, and that's not entirely a reflection of the Trial of a Time Lord either. I'm not saying that it suddenly went down because the Trial of the Time Lord was awful or anything. The format of the trial might not have helped it, but it wasn't the reason for the sudden change in public perception, because Revelation of the Daleks and the stories that preceded it the previous year, they were all getting audience figures of around 7 to 8 million, weren't they?
Yeah, good figures, consistent figures.
Trial, I think its peak was 4.9 million. So there were less than 5 million most weeks watching
Mate,
it.
I think it was largely psychological. I think if the BBC won't stand by this show, they're the ones who dipped it in, or drenched it in failure. We don't believe in this show anymore, and you lot shouldn't be watching this. This is awful. And once that had happened, nobody wants to be seen to be backing a failure, do they? No. If the people who make it aren't proud of it, why should I watch it? Why should I continue to give it my time? I honestly think that was more the problem than anything else. And the classic series never really recovered, did it? And when we got together the last time, we very much got up to that point, didn't we, where our show disappeared from the air for all intents and purposes. I mean, they didn't tell us it was gone for good, but we could read between the lines, couldn't we? And the fandom could smell something in the air about it. No matter what they said, they weren't doing anything. And so we came up, didn't we, collectively with that day of action, which we thought may force their hand, but it did. All it really did was herald a kind of decade of inaction and frustration and heartache and longing from Doctor Who fans. And I felt it when the show vanished. I knew, mate. I remember the night of the final episode of Survival. I'd got it. I was waiting, counting down the sort of hour, as I would always do it, as I'd always done right from the late 70s, counting down, an hour till Doctor Who, half an hour till Doctor Who, 10 minutes to, and I actually wanted that time to slow down because something in me, even though I was in my mid-teens, I knew that was the final episode of Doctor Who. That if this is not going to be on, and because at that point we knew there was going to be no 1990 series. I thought, well, if this is off for a year and a half again, there's no way. I just knew, mate. I just knew. How did you react to it? I mean, did you feel the same as I did, or differently?
It's funny that you say. Maybe I wasn't reading the magazine as close as I should have been, or something. I can't remember thinking it's not coming back in 1990. So it was a big shock to me. I remember them announcing in the magazine that John Nathan Turner was stepping down. And I didn't know then what we know about John Nathan Turner and BBC politics now. No one. So I was thinking, I've covered some of this previously about my thinking about John Nathan Turner and some of the things I said publicly in letters and so forth. That when the magazine said he was stepping down, I just thought, good. It needs some fresh air, it needs somebody fresh, it needs somebody new, take it in a fresh direction, reinterpret it, because it feels
I think we all did, even the John Nathan Turner fans felt that way. John Nathan Turner felt that way. He'd been trying to get off the show for years.
Yeah. I mean, I have a great deal of respect for him now, certainly. So I feel sorry for him, really. And I feel sorry for the way fans treated him. Okay, they treated him the way they did, not knowing, because it came because nothing was ever said. He never said publicly that he was trying to get off it and couldn't and wasn't allowed to get off. He never said publicly his plan was to leave after the 5 Doctors, but they couldn't find anybody else to replace him, so he carried on. We didn't know that his deal with Michael Grade was he will give Colin Baker his bad news if he can leave as well. And Grade says yes. And then a month or two later, Jonathan Powell succeeds Grade and says, you've got to do next year. We didn't know any of that. So it looked at the time that John was basically refusing to go. That's how I interpreted this.
That's how it looked.
And so when, like the famous DWB cover, JNT.
I was just thinking of that, Gary. I was just thinking of you, mate.
And John was thinking, if only I could, But we didn't know that at the time. So when they announced he was stepping down, I was thinking, oh, who's going to be next? Who's going to be next? So I wasn't thinking, oh, it's going away again for a while. So when
they did offer it to Paul Mount, didn't they, off the back of the Chronicles of Narnia, and he turned it down pretty much flat. And it seems after that, they didn't really seriously offer it to anyone else, certainly nobody else in-house, because this is the thing with the BBC. We know this now. If no bleeding obvious candidate makes themselves known, the BBC have no idea what to do. They need somebody with a seeming vision for the show to lead them, because they have never understood why the show was successful any of the times that it has been, and they're mystified when it fails too. I mean, people again, independent sources have come forward to us at Type 40 and said, people within the BBC have said, look, they will never say this publicly, but they know it's not working, and things like that. And they're really upset about it. It's embarrassing and it's upsetting because they know it's but they just don't know what to do. And I think that was the case in 1990 as well. I think they went to Paul was it Paul Mount or Paul Mount's a writer for TV Zone, isn't he? I'm thinking about Paul Stone. Sorry, Paul. Yeah, they went to Paul Stone. He was the producer of the Chronicles of Narnia. Right. Paul Mount was the writer in TV Zone who used to give the most terrible reviews to Sylvester McCoy stories. I've had him on the show, and we've talked about it as well. So back in 1990, though, I was looking at the calendar, Will, and thinking, God, what am I going to do? You know, I was looking at leaving school and starting college and all this, and Doctor Who was a marker for my year. You know, as the nights got darker, that was what got me through the autumn into the winter months, you know, the run down to Christmas. I thought, what am I going to have this year? I mean, how did you feel as it sank in that the show wasn't coming back? Did you look around for something else? How did you cope?
Well, there were two things. I had a double blow. There were two things. I'd heard in '85 when second series of Tripods was airing that the BBC weren't going to make the third. And it had come to me via the head of English. They got some paper, you know, that teachers read, and it was announced in there, they're not going to make the third series. And I can remember at age 15 thinking that's ridiculous. Who makes 2/3 of a trilogy and broadcasts it and then doesn't make the final third? So I just dismissed it. So I was thinking in, let me think, where are we? So 85, yeah. So, sorry, I'm getting my time zones mixed up here. 86 is when Tripods would have been on had they made the third series. Yeah, so I'm getting mixed up now. Let me just think about it.
Well, so even now, 36 years on, it seems a ridiculous call to make and like throwing money down the drain.
So that's right. I'm getting my times mixed up. 1986 was when the Tripods would have been on September to December. Right. And that would have been the third series. And the Trial of a Time Lord was put into that slot. So it was moved from January to March, which is how it had been the last few previous years, to September to December. So the Trial of a Time Lord had taken the place of Tripod Series 3. So that was a big blow. So in 1990, I was looking at the schedules and watching the trailers of, you know, the autumn season on BBC One and waiting for clips of season 27 to be slotted in somewhere.
Oh, no.
So I was hoping, I hadn't read that it was taking a break I was hoping it was going to come back with Sylve again. And then when September came and went and there was nothing, I thought maybe they're starting it a bit later.
It is strange to imagine this, isn't it? Because people watching this may be thinking, well, you know, this. How could you not know? Well, because we fans, we largely couldn't talk to one another with local group meetings and things like that.
And there was no great announcements. It wasn't in '85. It was all over the tabloid press that it was being suspended for 18 months. That was known by the general public, never mind the fans. In '89, there was no announcement. I read Doctor Who magazine and one or two fanzines that I came across. They used to advertise them in the back of Doctor Who magazine and TV Zone, didn't they? And you'd send off for the fanzines. And I didn't attend conventions or anything like that. So I didn't read a lot of the fan press. So I didn't know.
A recurring thing that we keep coming back to when we talk is that isolation. And so if you were isolated in what you heard and what you knew and somebody to speculate with, then when that show's removed as well, did that increase those feelings of isolation for you?
Yeah, because I was, as I said in our previous chat, by the end of the original show, the original era, I did feel very much a laughing stock. The program was not highly regarded at all. I remember when I just started my first full-time job in the autumn of 1989. So I was 19. I'd done a couple of part-time cleaning jobs before that. So this was my first full-time job. Very shy, socially awkward, finding it hard to integrate. All the issues I had in the transference from primary school to secondary school basically repeated themselves when I went into the working world. I was a fish out of water in every way. And where am I going with this now? Isolation, yeah. So I can remember in this soft drink, Alpine soft drinks. That's where I worked. So I was a quality controller for Alpine soft drinks. And I was talking to my colleagues there about Doctor Who, hoping that somebody there will like it, someone that I can discuss it with.
To.
And there was nobody. And then a manager who was just 2 or 3 years older than me decided to tune in that week to see what the fuss was about. And he watched an episode of Ghostlight. And the following morning, he just watched that Doctor Who last night. I remember the tone of his voice said it all.
That Doctor Who,
he didn't think it was any good at all. And that's a story that's now highly regarded amongst fans for its costume and the setting and the guest cast. But this guy, who would have been in his mid-20s, just thought it was a shadow of its former self, that Sylvester McCoy was embarrassing to watch, that the story was incomprehensible, and he didn't go back the following week. He tried it once, thought it was terrible, and so that was the environment that I was in as a fan. So then, when it was cancelled, there was absolutely nothing. When October 1990 rolled up and went, I realized then by the end of October, no, it isn't coming back. And it was an awful feeling, because no announcements, nothing to prepare you for, survival part 3 is the end for now. There was nothing. And I didn't twig at all that little speech at the end about the tea getting cold was, sending it off for a while. I just thought, that's a pleasant way to end the season, having that little speech at the end. I didn't think that was to send it away for a handful of years or many years. So I was absolutely gutted when it dawned on me it was not coming back. And then we had that little piece that Peter Cragine issued, didn't we? That popped up in the back of every Doctor Who magazine for several months about the Doctor languishing in the backwaters of popularity, and he needs a rest for a while.
We've prescribed a rest for the Doctor.
Yeah. And we're and letter writing campaigns. I remember the Peter Cragine's address was always given so that fans could write him a letter, and I wrote him a letter. I can't remember whether he replied or not, or if I just got a photocopied reply and a signature or something. But that feeling of trying to campaign for it to come back, that was all futile, wasn't it, really? And fans in America trying to save up X number of pounds to pay for a new series. That was an interesting thing, wasn't it? Yeah. And that didn't come to anything, because they're dealing with a corporation who don't want it back. As I said in
because there was no logic to it. There was no logic to it, because that show was clearly, obviously, for the outsider looking in, and to be honest, a lot of us fans couldn't understand why a show that made so much more money back for the BBC than it cost to make. You think, well, okay, if it makes that much, then surely you're throwing away a money-making machine here. But of course, none of that money actually went back into Doctor Who. It went back to the department, didn't it? And then would get allocated. That's how it worked. We know this now thanks to researchers like Richard Molesworth and that fabulous John Nathan Turner production diary. It's really rolled out all this stuff for us. But we had no, and particularly in the States, where obviously it's driven by advertising, isn't it? And the dollar is king, and there's no problem that can't be solved by throwing an S-ton of money at it. This will convince them, wave this wad at them, and they'd be mad not to take it. And it's not without good reason that one would feel that way until you realise that you're talking about the BBC, and the BBC is unique. Unique, aren't they? I'll be kind tonight. Yeah. Unique in the way that it's funded and its editorial stance.
That advert that they used to run, where they used to say, the BBC, you make it what it is. And I used to think, don't blame me, mate. Don't blame me for your output. You make it what it is. Because by then, there was nothing that I was interested in being broadcast by them.
Everything changed, didn't it?
Knocked on their head. Star cops had been killed off.
Mate, even Heidi High had gone. All those shows we just looked at, gradually they finished them all. They sent them all off into the sunset. They did bring back Brucey Forsyth when Bob Monkhouse went over to it. They did a bit of exchange, didn't they? We got Bruce Forsyth back with the Generation game. But other than that, everything gradually dragged to a halt. Even Blankety Blank stopped. They got Les Dawson doing some other stuff instead, something called Fast Friends. It's what the young people now call cringe. It was awful. But everything just got worse. And all those cozy shows from the tea times that we remember, all the night times, they were all gone. So I was like, I was looking around for something, for anything to latch onto to get me through those autumn winter nights.
And there were I guess in it must have been the 1990s. There were odd things that popped up, weren't there? Like you get
what did you find?
The Last Train. Did you remember that one with? I think Nicola Walker was in it.
That was a lot. That was a lot later. It was about 97, 98. Sacha Dhawan was in that. Very, very young when he was about 16, 17. It's a great cast for that. There's lots of things that turned up eventually.
Little bits and bobs like that. There was another thing called
Crime Traveller with Michael French.
Yeah. Bugs. I enjoyed that.
There was some decent stuff, but it's just not.
Did Anthony Horowitz created that, didn't he?
Yes, he did. Yeah.
Yeah, and what else? So there was a thing called Invasion. I think it was just. Was it Invasion Earth or Invasion?
That was an interesting one because that was a co-production. I think it may have been the first of its kind. That was a major co-production, a populist co-production between the BBC and an American network. I think that they'd got a co-production deal on the Dennis Potter stuff. Maybe not as early as The Sing Detective, but certainly by the time of Black Eyes and Karaoke and Cold Lazarus, there were co-productions with American networks there. But Invasion was the first kind of big, stupid, populist blockbuster drama, wasn't it?
It was such an intelligent thing as well. I've only ever seen it once when it was broadcast.
Me too.
I don't think has it ever been released on home media?
Not in Britain. You can get it in the States, fully enough. The network,
really?
They're proud of it. The people who went in with the BBC on that, they're prouder of it than the BBC are. So you can get it.
I can remember I can see the main actress with the blonde hair and face. I can see her in my mind's eye.
Well, it was Phyllis Logan. She was in it, and so was Fred Ward from Tremors.
Yeah. And I remember like sort of early CGI effects, and the aliens weren't like monsters. What were they called? The NDs or something.
Something like that.
And they were kind of something from another dimension, weren't they? So you didn't get with the CGI monsters or creatures. They were sort of intelligence, really.
It was proper kind of Nigel Neal stuff. It was written by the same guy. Well, he went on to create Cardiac Arrest with Helen Baxendale. Oh my God. He went on to create that. But now he's the guy behind Line of Duty, the huge show. He's the same writer. I can't remember his name now. Joe something or other, isn't it?
Joe Mercurio, something like that.
That's it. Jay Mercurio. Let us know in the live chat there. Joe Mercurio, something like that. Yeah, it's him. It's that guy. But I looked around for this stuff, but it was very thin on the ground because sci-fi was so out of fashion. Doctor Who had sort of represented in Britain, certainly. It was a last bastion. But I did find this now, obviously, because back then we got the ITV networks they'd all got the different names, hadn't they? We had Central in the Midlands.
Yeah.
What did you have where you were?
Granada in the northwest.
Granada, of course you did. So on Central in 1990, in the autumn, I was looking around for something to fill the Doctor Who gap. And on a Thursday night, not a Wednesday, 7:30, I had to wait until Thursday night at 11:15 at night to see. It wasn't a new show, it was an old one, but I'd never seen it before. They started running the New Avengers all the way through once a week, and I latched right onto that. That became and they only did it for a year, but they did show most of the episodes, and that very much scratched the Doctor Who itch for me for a time. But of course, it was at the time, it was a 13, 14-year-old show, so it was hard to get as excited about it as Doctor. But I'd never seen this stuff before, and it was culty, and it was campy, and it was fun, and so that filled the gap for a little while. But it wasn't long enough, because I was hoping as well that I knew it wasn't going to be on in 1990 Doctor Who, but I was hoping that 91, maybe 92 at a push, because why wouldn't they bring it back? Why wouldn't they? It's Doctor Who.
Yeah. It's like, as I said in our previous discussion, my mother used to say to me, when the New Adventures books started coming out, and I would show her the books and say, "Look, they're doing these books now, and it's like watching a Doctor Who movie when you read them, but with Sylvester and Sophie." And we used to laugh about Sylvester. I don't mean this in a cruel way, but his acting was better in the books. Because you would see his face and hear the voice, and the mannerisms were there, but they wouldn't be quite so pronounced as they could be on screen sometimes. So you got the Seventh Doctor, and he even won one year in Doctor Who magazine. He won Favourite Doctor. He wasn't on television. Do you remember that? He wasn't on television as the Doctor, but because the New Adventures were doing so well and fans were lapping them up, he actually beat Tom Baker for 1 year as Favourite Doctor in the readers' poll. So I said to my mother that look what's happening now. You know, why won't they bring it back on television if they can sell a series of books like this? And she just said to me, "It won't go away." That's what the BBC think of Doctor Who. It won't go away. It's just this irritating thing that continues to be a success even when it's not on.
It must have been immensely frustrating. But obviously you're a writer now. You've very, very successfully finally had your first Doctor Who work published, haven't you? You've written several books, haven't you, over the last 10, 15 years? But were you always a big reader, you know, even outside of the Target books? And so when they did start putting out Doctor Who books, did that scratch an itch for you and play into the reader that you were?
I wasn't an avid reader because I was a slow reader. So anything that didn't grab me swiftly would be discarded. So I've let a lot of things go by that people are very excited about and remember fondly, and I've not been there. I now like audiobooks.
So do I.
So rather than reading a book, I'll listen to a book. So I can say I've read a book and mean it when really I've listened to it, you know. But growing up then, there were certain ones. I remember when the Time Worm series came. I bought Exodus first, simply because it was Terence Dicks.
Because of the writer, yeah.
And I knew I was in for a good ride. And I lapped that up. I loved it. I loved the alternate history of the Nazis have won the war and now occupy Britain. I love the inclusion of the war chief and the warlord from the war games. I love the way Sylvester and Sophie were depicted. So I read that cover to cover and was engrossed in it. So as I say, if I like it and it gets me from the beginning, then you've got me the whole way through. So did you become a habitual reader of the range then? Did you latch onto that in a similar way? Was that able to fill the gap a little? It filled the gap a little in that I would go in W.H. Smith or wherever, and like I say, I would pick it off the shelf, and I would have a look at the first chapter, read the blurb on the back first, make sure it's something that would interest me. And then I would have a look at the first chapter. If it didn't grab me, it went back on the shelf. And that happened quite a lot because reading was something I had to persevere with, you see. Unless I was really keen on it, then I would race through it. It's funny how it works. That if I'm really into it, I can't put it down. So I had that one Time Worm Exodus. What was the one that Jim Mortimer did with the Silurians? Was it Jim Mortimer?
Blood Harvest.
Was it Birthright?
No, not Blood Harvest. Birthright. Blood Harvest was the vampire one.
Am I mixing that up with a Big Finish play? What's the one where it's set in an alternate Third Doctor era, and it's like the Earth's all jungle?
I think you're right.
Silurians have took over.
I think it's Birthright. Because I can picture the cover. It's one of the best. It's one of the best covers. In fact, it's one of my favourite Doctor Who book covers of all time. I'm sure it's called. Yes,
that was a great one.
No, we've definitely got the wrong title. It's not that. Where are we?
I'm going to be kicking myself when this comes up.
Yeah, it is. Okay. Talk amongst yourselves, everybody. Oh, it's blood heat. So we were.
So there's blood in it somewhere.
That's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
there's
yeah.
that one. The Dimension Riders by Daniel Blythe was one that I really liked. You might remember the cover to that, where it's got the Doctor and a skeleton playing chess on what looks like the remains of a spaceship bridge or something, with the stars in the background. Really great painted cover.
Yes.
That one that had I bought that one because Ian and Barbara were in it, and I wanted to see how the Seventh Doctor interacted with Ian and Barbara. And I read the whole book, wrote to Daniel Blythe, and got a lovely letter back from him, several pages worth. And then I wrote.
So even though it wasn't an obsessive compulsive thing for you, Will, where you would need to buy every single book and you would be counting the weeks down until the next one was published, when you latched onto something, you had that same sort of response. You felt compelled to write, to correspond with the writer, to celebrate it in some way, to expand the experience a little.
And I was always keen on the reviews of the books in the magazine, even if I never read the book. I wanted to know what was going on. I wanted to know.
Print prologues, didn't they?
Yeah. So when Bernice Summerfield was introduced, I was interested in that, and the other characters later on. Is it Roz Forrester and Chris Quedge in the later series, and the Missing Adventures? I did love the Missing Adventures. The Romance of Crime by Gareth Roberts was. I came to that quite late, the Romance of Crime, because I struggled with the beginning of it. And it was Daniel Blythe. I'd written to Daniel Blythe and said I struggled with the Romance of Crime. I don't know why everyone's so keen on it. And it was him who said to me in his reply, you should keep going with that, because it's a great... Gareth Roberts has really captured season 17 and the Douglas Adams humor, and that, you can. I think it was either him or a reviewer in DWM who said you can almost hear Dudley Simpson's incidental music as you're reading it. It captures that era so well. So I did indeed read the Romance of Crime in the end, and agreed with everything Daniel Blythe said about it. And there was another one. Was it The English Way of Death?
That's right.
I think that followed it with one of the characters. Is it Menlove Stokes? I think he's called. Who was in Romance of Crime. He comes back in The English Way of Death. So I then wrote to Gareth Roberts and said how I felt about those two works, and I got from him, with no letter, just this parcel came through the post, when The Plotters was published, which was his William Hartnell, and who was the lineup in that? Dr.
Wasn't it Stephen?
I think it was Ian, Barbara, and Vicky, I think. Okay. And it was to do with Guy Fawkes. So it had that kind of whimsy, Dennis Spooner kind of whimsy about it. So just as he did with season 17, he was able to capture that particular strand of the Hartnell era. And there's the thing that always got me about that book. There's sequences where Barbara has got stuck with Guy Fawkes and his men as they're preparing to do their rebellious deed and blow up the Houses of Parliament. And it's very clever how Gareth wrote it, because he has Barbara fall in love with Guy Fawkes. So when they finally come for him, on that November the 5th, when they finally come for him, as a reader, you're really torn, because you're reading, what's going to happen to him when they get him. Regardless of your political feelings about the Houses of Parliament and royalty and all of that, you're drawn into this story of Barbara is in love with him. And she knows, as a historian, she knows what's going to happen to him. So it was a very mature and very well-written piece, and it touched my heart. I've never read it since, but I just have that memory, emotional memory of thinking, oh no, they've got him. Instead of thinking, hurrah, he's not going to blow up the Houses of Parliament. I was clever writing. So the fact that I can recall that from one reading from 30 years ago, whatever it was, is testament to those books, you know. So it was filling the gap a little, yeah. And then of course we have other things like the video projects that BBV and Real Time released as well.
The fans did swarm, didn't they, to kind of to help one another out, I think, and to create with the, I suppose, the hope that some of it may not necessarily push the BBC into action, then to at least to fill the gap and to start something that could be a successor to Doctor Who. But in the meantime, we had to get on with our lives, didn't we? And that was, I also was leaving college and trying to get my first job and forming relationships, social lives, a social circle, and meeting a partner. All those kind of things. Those are the kind of things that start to, I think they pull at us, don't they? As we grow as people, and eventually, as you say, you might go into the workplace and find that you can't relate to anybody. You may feel more isolated there than ever. Then the next place that you go to, it may be a completely different experience. And I think it's the same with your circle of friends. I think it depends how you want to step outside your comfort zone and try new things. I mean, how did you find? Obviously, you spoke at length about your relationship with your mother when we last talked, and about how she felt about Doctor Who. And you've mentioned your colleagues. I mean, at this point, were you still largely isolated, or were you starting to gradually meet people?
Well, I had friends. You know, I had family members. I had friends of family. I wasn't like the sort of stereotypical loner, completely isolated in his bedroom, just listening to his records and watching Doctor Who videos and nothing outside of that. I had a circle of friends, but no one was bothered about it. No one at all. And if
so the
they
conversations would be about anything but Doctor Who.
Yeah. It was awkward because, like we spoke about earlier last time about football and things like that. There's a barrier if you're male, and maybe even female these days. But if you're male and you don't like football or any sports, and you do love science fiction things, that really creates problems on a social level. So that even people who like you and you get on with them, you find you have to talk about other things, and it does create a barrier, because as soon as they start talking to one another about sport, that's it for you. You're out.
The shot has just come down with me. I can't even fake it. I just doing it.
I actually, in my mid 20s, I had some sessions with a clinical psychologist because things had got to a head. And one of the solutions presented by the clinical psychologist regarding sport was to try and show an interest, right? So just as you say, you can't fake it. So I sat down with a notepad, and when the sports news came on, the local sports news, I was writing down little details that I could memorize about what was happening locally, so that when it was brought up the following day at work, I could sort of join in a bit, Yeah. So I went to work in a taxi. I remember it being in a taxi. So I was I could drive, but I wasn't driving on this particular occasion for whatever reason. And the taxi driver, making conversation, says, "Do you see the news last night, Bolton?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "What do you think about such and such?" And I thought, "Oh yeah, I know about that because it was on the news last night." So I tried to sort of fake it, and say something about this particular situation. I can't remember what it was or who it was, but the next thing he said was, "Yeah, and what about?" And he went into a little bit more detail, and instantly I had no idea what the guy was talking about, and I had no idea and cared even less, And I had to own up then and say, "I'm sorry, mate, I don't follow it that closely." So it completely failed. And then when I went back to the psychologist the following week, And she said, "How did you go on with our little experiment?" And I had to say it was a complete failure. And I told her how it went, and she just went, "Okay, maybe we'll leave that one then." So I wasn't. I don't want to paint the picture of someone who is completely isolated and has no friends and struggles with everything, because that's not how I was. But it was more the minutiae, and the subtleties of social interaction that I struggle with. That
the picture you've painted for me in the past is that you've often lived a sort of a parallel existence, where sometimes, but not as often as you'd probably have wanted, where things have sort of crossed over. Rather than being literally isolated, certainly a feeling of isolation is different to being actually isolated.
Yeah, I felt extremely lonely. I mean, when I was 25, I'd been married 2 years by then. So things were actually looking up for me.
That's quite a drastic, it's a very drastic step.
I was starting to assert myself. I was starting to feel more comfortable in my own skin. When a very attractive lady is interested in you and then will agree to marry you, that does give you a massive boost of self-esteem, and I had zero self-esteem. So getting married changed things for me, but I was still struggling at work. I was still, that they say on a Friday afternoon, when they finished at 1 o'clock, finished early on a Friday afternoon, we're all going to nip across to the pub across the road for a pint before we go home. Are you coming? And I always said no. Because one, I wasn't that big a drinker, and two, what was I going to talk to them about? I couldn't envisage myself sitting at a table or on a stool or whatever, and having a jar of something and making small talk. I just couldn't see myself doing that. Now, I look back on those days and think, I should have just gone across for half an hour, had a shandy, and just sort of sat there and smiled and joined in where I could, and then gone home. I would have made life easier for myself if I'd have done that. But at the time, I just thought, no, that's not me. It's not what I do. And I always said no, even though I was invited week after week after week. So they were trying, in their own way. They were trying to help me join in and integrate a bit, but I was resisting it. It didn't help that I was completely obsessed with The Prisoner. I'd discovered that around about 2021. A pen friend of mine called Dominic Eatwell.
What a brilliant name! How come you know these people with fantastic names?
And he was another one of these, Doctor Who man would have the pen pals thing in the back, and you'd write off to somebody. So I had this. This is something that bothers me a bit now looking back, because it sounds so sad. But my closest friends, when it came to Doctor Who and science fiction things, were people I'd never met. These letters going backwards and forwards through the post. And he was a few years my junior. I think he was in his mid to late teens and I was about 20. So I was interacting with somebody younger, because I was young at heart, I suppose. I was intellectually quite bright, but academically slow and emotionally a little underdeveloped, I think. And it's a cruel brew, that, to be bright in some ways and think deeply about things, but you've got no one you can talk to about the things you think deeply about. But no one has the same tastes in television and in music as you do. So I was taught.
Did you feel any of that was a burden in any way, or was it just, this is me, this is just who I am, it's that simple?
I was very tormented by it. Yeah, I used to be angry. I used to resent the fact that compromise. I was happy to compromise. You see, when the psychologist was saying, let's learn a few social skills and help you along a bit, I was all up for it. I was up for that. Yeah, let's learn a few social skills. But what used to make me angry was that the compromise was all one-sided. It all had to be me
in what
compromising.
way? Oh.
And the people around me the football people and people who like chart music and the whatever, they wouldn't compromise. There was no compromise at the other
you were
end.
very clear about what was expected from you, but what's expected of the rest. There's more of them than there is of me. So what are they going to do?
Yeah, I used to think, why should I be coming to these meetings and talking about how I can be helped to integrate when the people I'm trying to be integrating with won't meet me halfway? It all has to be their way. So I used to get angry about the fact that I had to learn things about football so I can have a conversation about football superficially, but they wouldn't learn anything about Doctor Who or Star Trek, to meet me halfway on that.
Yeah, we'll do an hour on the offside rule if we can just do half an hour on unit dating. Not much to ask.
So I used to have these exchanges with this young boy, Dominic. And I would be looking forward to the reply so much. I used to look at the letterbox. Has anything come, And there'd be pages and pages from him. So he, as far as my Doctor Who fan life went, he was kind of one of my closest friends. So when I'd never met, I still have never met, and lost touch with him in recent years. But he was the one I was to talk about feeling like an outsider, and I had certain views about society and the way people were, and he said, you would like a program called The Prisoner. And I'd heard about it. I'd heard my parents talking about it, and particularly the controversial ending. My mum used to get angry every time you got on the subject of The Prisoner.
My stepdad used to get angry about it as well, and by that point it had been 20. Yeah, how long was it? About 24 years. I discovered The Prisoner in around 1988, and as soon as I mentioned it, people, their nostrils would flare.
Yeah. So I was about 20, so it would be 1990-ish. And Dominic sent me a video cassette, the old Channel 5 video release, remember, with his cover, with his jacket on the cover. And it was Hammer into Anvil and something else, whatever the two episodes were on that.
I think It's Your Funeral is on that tape. I think.
Right. And I kind of got what it was from that. And then he said, maybe I should have sent you the first episode. Yes, Dominic, you should. So he sent me the first episode, and then by the end of that, and Chimes of Big Ben, that was it. I went and bought all the tapes, week after week after week until I got them, because I felt like this guy was me. So me working in a soft drinks factory and struggling a bit, and really obsessed with The Prisoner and feeling like I was the prisoner. And feeling like I was a number that didn't count for anything, and that the system is designed to operate in a particular way, and if you don't toe the line, then you're the enemy. Did
you feel then that The Prisoner was, even though it was by that point a 25-year-old show, that for you it was the right show at the right time for that point in your life?
Yeah.
Did you find it helpful?
Well, I found it reassuring that somebody out there clearly felt the way I did about the world. I had the same feeling with the tripods. My peers at school, I remember, they gave up watching it sort of a third of the way through series 1 because it's called The Tripods and there are not many tripods in it. And you can't really defend that, really, because it's true. And it was drawn out. And there was extra storylines put in to knock it up to 13 episodes because the book didn't stretch that far. So all the criticisms of it are, they're right. I couldn't defend it. But the thing that used to keep me watching was the concept of people being capped. And it's very much like The Prisoner of the Village. You've got someone who can see things as they really are, but everybody around that person doesn't seem to see it. They're part of it, and they seem to like the way it is. And the people being capped in the tripods. So that because I used to, in defense of the tripods, I used to say to the people I was discussing it with, they don't have to be there. That's the whole point. They don't have to be physically present. If there's this thing in your head keeping you under control and keeping you obedient, they don't have to police you because the cap is doing it. And every other capped person, if you say anything that's regarded as rebellious or they don't like the sound of it, every capped person in that story is the enemy. Because the first thing they'll do is tell the elder of the village where you live that you're talking in a way that should not be tolerated. They'll summon a tripod and you will be capped. So I was at 14 and 15 heavily into the tripods because I felt like Will Parker. I felt like I was on my way to the White Mountains and everybody around me was capped. So then when the prisoner came at age 20, that kind of magnified it for me. It was a similar idea presented in a very different way, granted, but a similar idea of being controlled and resisting that control. And even if it means alienating people, rather be alienated than conform to such a degree that you lose who you are. You know, I was not willing to do it. So that's where I was at in my mid-20s when the Virgin New Adventures were coming out. You had the Bill Baggs videos and the real-time videos and things like, was it the Air Zone Solution? That would be 93, wouldn't it? Did that come out?
It was 93 because, it was 1993 because the whole thing with that was that they had to scrap, hadn't they, the Dark Dimension, the actual 30th anniversary story, and the Air Zone Solution sort of appeared instead, but it wasn't the first one. They've been making dramas with Colin for a little while, hadn't they, as The Stranger, and they weren't easy to find, these things, but they did exist, and
I think Forbidden Planet in Manchester, Stockholm, I think that's probably where I got the ones that I bought. I didn't buy everything that was put out. I bought The Stranger and Miss Brown, that series, which is obviously the Sixth Doctor and Perry by another name. I bought In Memory Alone. That's it, In Memory Alone. Well, it was like a sort of Sapphire and Steel type story.
They were, I tracked them all. They just
sort of show up out of nowhere and get involved. I really like that one, In Memory Alone.
Which other fandom can you think of? I mean, it's one thing to make a fan film.
Yeah,
I think Star Trek fans have been making fan films probably since the 70s. Doctor Who fans in America more so would be making fan films, but to take it next level and to try and sort of take the baton really and be innovative, be enterprising, as a lot of people were then, whether it was on audio with audio visuals, whether it was what BBV were doing or what Gary Lee was doing with independent dramas as well. They were doing Ian Levine too. You know, they all had their hats in the ring, didn't they? And the novel range that continued to expand, and the hunger for Doctor Who was obviously there. None of us were alone in that respect. And I carried on buying Doctor Who magazine. Obviously, I've been buying that continuously since 1980. I buy it to this day. And there was a community there within the letters pages. So you knew that other people like us were out there somewhere, but connecting with them as real life took hold, certainly for me, was another question entirely. I'd stopped going to local groups sometime before that. I hadn't been to a convention in years. I'd met someone and that relationship went really well. I ended up getting on the property ladder, all these very serious things, which at the time, for someone of my age in their early 20s, I jumped at all of it. You know, it's fearless, with a fearlessness that really now I look back and think, oh, fair play. I wouldn't have thought it. But I think if I'd have stopped to think about any of it, it would have probably scared the life out of me. But it all just sort of happened for me, and Doctor Who was always still there for me, and I still yearned for it to be back on the television. But you become resigned, don't you? And other things do take its place, whether it's real world things or TV shows, because fashions change as well. You know, I latched onto, or did I train myself to? I'd always liked Star Trek, for example, and I always loved Star Trek. And so when the Next Generation really boomed in the States, and you could buy them on video cassettes, here, or you could watch them on Sky. And I thought I'll invest in Star Trek because that's there constantly. They make so much of it. That'll help. That'll help dim the pain of having no Doctor Who.
I suppose it also kind of showed it was possible Doctor Who could come back. The idea that Star Trek would be reinvented with a new crew and a new ship and continue, because we had the movies continuing the original thing, but the idea of it coming back to television with different people, different characters, and a new captain and continue, that kind of showed that it was possible to do that. And that Doctor Who could do it. I love Star Trek: The Next Generation. When it was on BBC Two, was it on Wednesday nights? BBC Two, right. Something like that. And then we got as far as Best of Both Worlds Part 1, and the BBC lost the license. I think Sky Television had bought it up or something.
They lost the rights to Sky. Yeah,
is that right? And I remember such an outcry that Best of Both Worlds Part 1 ended on that big cliffhanger and the BBC couldn't show Part 2. There was such an outcry that Sky allowed them to show Part 2.
I think we should just, get the Americans who are watching, let you Americans out there watching this, just take a moment to take that in. Yes, the BBC lost the rights. They had no intention. But yeah, they did eventually. You're right, Sky.
They allowed them to show it, didn't they? So it could be completed. Yeah. And then that's it. If you didn't have Sky, because I didn't have satellite television or cable for many years.
Me neither. That's why I bought the VHS tapes. As soon as I was able to, as soon as I was able to start work and I got money coming in, I thought, okay, what do I want to spend my money on? Yeah. And this was before I bought my first house. I thought, well, I'd like some more Star Trek in my life. There's lots of it out there and it's quite affordable. And it was a nice time. It was a nice. It wasn't Doctor Who, but it was still a nice time. The Doctor Who tapes were coming out as well. Of course they were, but there weren't so many of them. It became part work in VHS form, didn't it? So, did you buy the tapes? Did you commit to the VHS range of Doctor Who's?
Yeah, I did. Bought pretty much all of them. Sometimes, if a story had a terrible reputation, and it wasn't one that I'd seen, I wouldn't bother. There were times when I bought them anyway and then wished I hadn't. I apologize now to Hartnell fans all over the world, but when I bought the VHS of The Web Planet, I don't think I ever got to the end of it. I struggled a great deal with The Web Planet, and haven't seen it since the VHS came out. Stories where I didn't bother and then later found out you should never listen to fan-received wisdom is I never bothered buying the set that had the Time Monster in it. So what was it? It was packaged as like Greek legends, so the Horns of Nimon, Underworld, and the Time Monster all released in a set. And then years later, I think I saw it going for about £6 in HMV in Blackpool, because the HMV locally had gone then. So whenever I visited Blackpool, I'd always pop in their HMV to see what was there. And I got it for about £6. I thought, you know what, £6, why not?
For 6 episodes of classic Doctor Who that I've never seen before.
Yeah, I remember Horns of Nimon from when I was 9 and loved it as a 9-year-old. And I remembered Underworld as well. But the Time Monster, I was 2 when that was broadcast. So I didn't remember, so I thought, didn't remember anything about it. And then when I watched it, I thought, all right, it's made on the cheap, like all the classic series stories are, all right. There were 1 or 2 embarrassing moments. I wish they hadn't come up with the acronym Tom Tits, but never mind. But I thought the Master was great in it. I liked the time ram idea, the 2 TARDISes, a TARDIS inside a TARDIS, and all of that stuff, which I didn't realize that Logopolis hadn't come up with that. That wasn't original in Logopolis. It had been done before. And the Chronivore, as embarrassing as it is to watch it as an adult, I realized that this guy on Kirby wires flapping his blankets about and screeching and wearing white plimsolls with laces, being swung around in the studio. It made me realise that was actually my earliest memory of Doctor Who, the chronophore. I remember the screech, and I remember it being terrifying because I was 2 when I was exposed to that.
It took you seeing it again to
I didn't
restart that memory.
remember ever encountering the chronovore at all. I just knew the fan received wisdom that it was embarrassing and a joke, and it looked terrible, and even Barry Letts was embarrassed by how it was presented and so on. So I was very pleasantly surprised by the Time Monster. That as a story, it works very well, and everyone's giving it all they've got. It's just made on the cheap, and so certain things in it don't work. So I was enjoying rediscovering some of the ones I loved from my boyhood, like the Robots of Death. I watched that umpteen times when it came out in the uncut form. You know, it was presented like a TV movie. That first release, I used to watch that whenever my mother went out anywhere and I had the place to myself, or me and my brothers did. Brew up, make a cup of tea, get some sandwiches and some biscuits, and watch the Robots of Death right through, and would never tire of it. And then later they reissued it in episodic format, didn't they? So I loved all that, as we all did. Then fans who...
It makes me sound... I do wonder that it makes us sound ungrateful when, Doctor Who wasn't on the television, but we had... The fan base was getting creative, but we did have all these stories, the stories that they'd refused to repeat. They were finally being released, and we could see them. And it did have a magic of its own, but it was very aware, obviously, that we were kind of excavating something rather than being along for the ride, watching something thrive and grow and being a vital part of the popular landscape. You know, you mentioned your brother a moment ago. You got brothers, and the general popular culture was exploding, driven partly by a couple of brothers who didn't get on that well. They still don't, Liam and Noel Gallagher. But this was what popular culture was like in the 90s against the backdrop of those tapes coming out. We got Britpop, we got the Royal Britannia stuff. We got cinema was also getting bigger than ever. I mean, if you think that Doctor Who didn't compare favourably to, say, The Black Hole, The Return of the Jedi, Batteries Not Included, or The Last Starfighter, all those movies, in the 90s, you were looking across from what Doctor Who used to be, watching these VHS tapes at films like Jurassic Park and Independence Day, and these swaggering... There seemed to be more swagger on bigger screens than ever, whilst Doctor Who was getting smaller and getting a dimmer memory for, if not for us, then the general world. People were starting to forget about the Daleks and the TARDIS and the names of the Doctors and things like that. Were you aware of its memory kind of gradually draining away as time moved on?
Certainly in the sort of the few years preceding its return, to be at work, I was working in an office job by then, and to say to younger people, it's a bit like a TARDIS, isn't it?
Yeah.
And they say, what's a TARDIS, or the Dalek. You talk about the Daleks and what's a Dalek. That was strange to live in a world where not only did they not think much of it, they didn't know what you were talking about. But that was kind of late on. That was kind of sort of 2000 thereabouts, where I started to feel that I really was alone with it. You know, apart from Doctor Who fans who were getting into Big Finish and so forth. I really loved Big Finish when that first started up. I bought everything from the Sirens of Time up to Zagreus, and then
me too.
And then I started after Zagreus. Is it that when they went into the alternate universe?
That's right. Yeah, I carried on buying them until after.
I didn't
Zagreus,
bother so much with that. But I dipped in and out. If they had a really good review and people were talking about a particular release, I would go and get it. And I'm still like that now. I'm choosy now. But everything from Sirens of Time up to Zagreus, absolutely loved Big Finish. And I can remember thinking and saying to a mate of mine who used to listen to them with me, it wasn't a fan in the way I am by any means, but enjoyed watching it. We used to get the vids out and watch old episodes. So I got him into Big Finish. And I used to say to him, do you know, if it never comes back on telly, I don't care as long as we've got this. I was so invested in Big Finish at those initial releases. And I thought, I don't need it. I don't need it to come back on television. We've got this. It's great. And they were once they got Paul McGann on board, and they were developing it as a new series with Charlie and all of those stories. Yeah, that was a golden period for Big Finish, where they got Paul McGann and did those stories leading up to Zagreus. Yeah.
So a great many people did feel that they got Doctor Who back, or as close an approximation as they possibly could. By that point, I'd say 9/10 of the series was out on VHS, so we'd got that. We got a thriving book line. We got all sorts of things going on, and the stories were continuing, even if it wasn't technically with new actors. We did have Paul McGann there. We did have this. So something was going forward somewhere, which I think is an ideal place for us to bring this conversation this time to a close, Will. But I think there's still lots of places we could go with this as we work our way through the decades. But
I was going to mention my appearance on Channel 4 television.
Channel 4 television. Whoa! Stop the press. We can't miss that. Go on.
We'll end on this one. This was 1998, so I was 28.
Yeah.
A program called Right to Reply, which you probably remember.
Okay. I remember Right to Reply.
And it was the 35th anniversary of Doctor Who, and they were launching what we know as BBC Three now, but it's called BBC Choice then. It was their new digital channel, and they weren't going to repeat anything on terrestrial television. There was no celebration of Doctor Who. There was no Doctor Who night. There was no let's repeat some episodes on BBC Two, like we'd had with Doctor Who night, and like we'd had with the 30 years in the TARDIS documentary, which I love that. So there was nothing for the 35th, but in order to encourage people to buy subscriptions to BBC Choice, the new cable channel, they were running an entire weekend of classic Doctor Who and interviews with people who'd been in it. And I was so angry that they didn't mind using it to promote BBC Choice and up the subscriptions. But they weren't going to show anything on terrestrial television. I wrote to Right to Reply. And then I got a phone call from one of the producers saying, you are one of two people who've written in about this subject, and we've decided we'd like you to come on. So I went down to London and did a day's filming. And I had a script based on my letter. They turned it into a script, all the points that were in the letter. And they had me interviewing Gary Gillett, who was the then editor of Doctor Who.
Really?
Steve Cole, who was editor of BBC Books at that time. And I went to the Who shop to speak to Alexander Cole.
Yeah.
And if you look up on YouTube, Right to Reply, Doctor Who, you'll see me wearing a suit, considerably slimmer, with a full head of hair, interviewing all these people.
Wow. What can we get? We'll get the link and we'll put it in the description of the video so people can find it. How about that?
Yeah. And it's one of those things that, like, we were talking about, were you still actively, in love with the program? Yes, I very much was.
Yeah, you were.
At age 28. And Gary Gillett was 26 at that time. I always remember thinking, wow, 2 years difference. And I'm working wherever I was working at the time, and he's the editor of Doctor Who magazine. I was jealous. Insanely jealous. How can he do this as a job and I do what I do as a job? But it was great meeting all of these people. It absolutely knackered me. It did. We started about 9 o'clock in the morning doing the stuff against a blue screen. They wanted me to stand on this revolving platform, right? So
Well,
glad
I think we ought to do a commentary of this clip.
I'm so glad
long's
that
it
this
last?
thing didn't work. They wanted me to flail my arms like that, stood on this revolving platform and looking up. And then they were put behind me, stars moving up. So it looks like I'm falling through space.
They're going to make you look a total tit, in other words.
Yeah, I was Tom Tit that day. And thankfully, the device, they spent 2 hours on this thing and they couldn't get it to work. So they were all going, what are we going to do? So I said, why not just sit me in a chair against the blue screen? I'll talk directly into the camera and put a blue vortex over my face. And the producer, what was she called? Claire Saber, she was called, yeah. And her assistant was Donna McConnell, yeah. Fond memories of that. And Claire said to me, and this showed how little they knew about Doctor Who, really. She said, is that a Doctor Who type thing then? The vortex.
Oh,
and I said it's the opening titles for the whole of the 1970s almost. So they did that and it worked. So I was even able to sort of help them overcome their problem. And then when we got to the Museum of Moving Image, where they beamed me in, and I materialized at the Museum of the Moving Image. That's where I interviewed Gary Gillett. He was livid because he very rarely got a day off Doctor Who magazine. And this was his day off. And they'd said, right, we'll be there by whatever time. Yeah. But because we arrived 2 hours late, he was not happy that his day off was basically ruined by right to reply. I mean, it was fine with me, but he let it be known he was not happy that he'd stood there waiting for 2 hours for the camera crew to turn up and me. You know.
We're going to get this clip.
I'm happy to talk about that with you if you get hold of it, and I'll walk you through it.
It's a date. We're definitely up for that. You kept that under your hat this whole time. I can't believe it.
I thought you already knew.
No idea, mate. No idea at all. Let's see what. Let's finish off with a pretty picture, shall we?
Go on then.
When Doctor Who disappeared from the screens, so did a lot of the licenses, didn't they? The toys and things like that. We got the books. They carried on with the new adventures. Dapol continued making mostly Daleks, a nice little range of figures. But I think we had to sort of sit and dream about what could be while other franchises took flight. But now, in 2023, a lot of us have got collections of lots of action figures from character options, and some people use them to make artwork, like the Toy Lord. This is one of his creations, where he sets some classic series Daleks. So which Daleks, are those the Death of the Daleks ones?
They look like it, don't they? They're very silvery. And the I kind of, my favourite Daleks are kind of the genesis of the Daleks, where there are more darker shade.
Yeah, give me Genesis or Resurrection. Those are my two go-to Daleks.
Yeah. These silvery ones, they do look very Death to the Daleks, don't they?
Yeah. I think he's got out in the garden here, because if you look, because he's got the TARDIS there is set, and it's slightly smoky, and the Daleks are looking back on it. And if you look at the weeds and things, he's obviously done
it looks
shrunk
terrific.
it all down. It does. It's wonderful. I love all this kind of stuff. English Country Garden, Doctor Who. Yeah. Episodes we never saw. That kind of thing. Have you got an action figure collection?
I wish it would be discovered this episode so I could watch it. It looks great.
Have you got an action figure collection as well? Do you buy many of these?
I don't know. I've not bought anything like that for a long time. With me, it's just the episodes themselves, of course, and various media. I stopped. I used to have quite a stack of Doctor Who weeklies and Doctor Who magazines, and we moved house some years ago, and I don't know why I did it, but I thought, I don't really need these now, do I? And I threw them. We were having a big clear out. We couldn't take everything that we had with us to where we were going, and I got rid of them all, threw them out. And now I think, why did I do that? You know, all those Doctor Who magazines. So I don't have a massive collection, excuse me, of Doctor Who magazine either. So I'm not a collector in that sense. I don't collect the toys. I have the odd thing like a mug, like this mug. Somebody got me this as a present, which I'm
nice one, that,
grateful. I would like to have, and I've not seen them anywhere. I used to have the diamond logo on a mug and the neon logo on a mug. And they must have got broke at some point, and I never replaced them. But are they still on the market, those?
You can still get them. I've got the neon one on a mug from around 5 years ago. I think I picked it up from the Doctor Who Experience or from Forbidden Planet. But I know they're putting out a lot of new stuff now with the new diamond logo on, the fabulous, resplendent, bluey diamond logo. And I would imagine that they'll bring some out again soon, sooner or later, eventually. They'd be mad not to, wouldn't they, when they brought everything else back?
Yeah. I've got the records, music, the Radiophonic Workshop albums.
Yeah.
I love all that. So anything in media, if it's can be watched or played or heard, I'm more in that direction than collecting the figures.
Wouldn't part with them in a million years. Well, I think we've established we're going to have to get together and talk again, Will. We've got so much left we could get into. Always enjoy your company. And these conversations are so generous. I would imagine, keep anybody out there watching this, please. I forgot to tell them earlier on, please like the video, subscribe to the Type 40 channel, and hit the cloister bell to get all the notifications about what's coming next and when. Extra chats, like my conversations here with my friend Will, or maybe the other stuff that we do, the discussions or the deep dives, the unboxings, everything else that goes on Type 40 Extra. Then there's the Type 40 podcast itself, all the reviews, previews, interviews, geek outs, and deep dives on that, as always, with a standard podcast fare, I suppose. On this episode, for example, we talked to the legendary Doctor Who artist, cover artist, Jeff Cummings. Not just a Doctor Who artist, of course. He's one of the most exciting, vivid artists to have ever worked on the Doctor Who brand. He's worked on so many other things as well. Album covers, magazine covers, so many things that you will have had no idea that it was him. He talked to Simon and myself about it a few months ago on that edition of the show. Type 40 Live, that's back soon, just a couple of weeks away. And I think we're all getting quite primed. We need to scratch that itch and get back into it as we get closer to the 60th anniversary itself. Well, lots to look forward to. We hope. It's been a little slow so far, but I have every hope we're gonna rally, my friend. We're gonna rally.
I think it's going to explode when we get nearer to it. I think they're deliberately holding it all back. In the 50th year, we didn't get a great deal then, did we? It was all kind of held back until we got the Adventures in Space and Time and Day of the Doctor, and a couple of recovered stories released on DVD. But it seemed to take a while to build up then, as I remember.
I think that, in all fairness, though, what we forget now is that we did have Series 6B screening on the television from around March onwards, wasn't it? Which is only 7 or 8 episodes, but we did get a lot more new Doctor Who than we've got this year. Yeah, and beggars can't be choosers.
I don't mind having to wait myself. I know everyone's going, "Come on, I need to know some more." I don't mind having to wait. I think when it does come, we'll get, we'll be. I think we will sort of draw the conclusion it was worth the wait when it finally manifests.
I hope so.
When we start getting a few trailers, that'll ramp it up a bit.
I hope so, Will. I'm a very, very patient guy, but this is trying me. I don't mind telling you. Thanks again for your company on this one, Will. We'll speak to you again soon. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the cloister bell, and all that jazz. Get in touch with Will. You're on social media, aren't you, Will? You're over on Twitter.
Yeah, on Twitter @HadcroftWill. It used to be the other way around, and then somebody from China took it over and started doing despicable things. So I had to get shut of that. So it's @HadcroftWill on Twitter, and I'm on Facebook, Will Hadcroft. Yeah.
There you go. Star of right of reply, Will Hadcroft. And I'm on Twitter and Instagram as the Spacebook, wheezing and groaning, ranting and raving about all things geeky inside and outside of the TARDIS. So come and see what I'm rambling on about from within my diseased mind. Today, it's usually something from the 80s, some album cover, old advert or cinema artwork or something like that. Or some form of Doctor Who trivia, something that I've found that I'm putting out there and giving my 2 pennies worth on. So come and find me on social media there, and of course follow the Type 40, follow their accounts as well. So we've got Type 40 on Instagram and Twitter. That's it for this one. Leave us a comment on what you think about the topics that we've covered on this show. Will's memories there of the 1990s and some of the stuff we've been talking about. Any Prisoner fans out there, of course, drop us a comment about that. Any New Avengers fans too? Were you there watching that with me in the 90s? Any Oasis fans hoping they're going to get back together? Who knows? Maybe. Keep them crossed, everybody. We always have the time if you have the space here at Type 40 Extra. See you on the next one. Bye-bye.